Whenever I see Holland, I kind of just think, man, I wish Richard Nixon were around still. Like, put money on who would win in, like, a jowl fight between those two. Oh, this taffy, you son of a gun!
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Ex-Mormon from My Spiritual Life, and I got Jared here today helping me. And today we are talking about our thoughts from General Conference, October 2020. But first, we have to show you, we got this cool ass shit. So,
it's the Sabbath.
It's the Sabbath. So you can't buy it today. Well, this will launch on Friday. You
it's some cool butt shiz, yo.
Anyway, we've been super excited to launch this store. For those who are interested in supporting our channel, you can support our channel by buying some cool shirts. And we're super excited about it. We've had some really fun designs on there. Yeah, sorry, I almost got, I almost dropped this awesome unruly child shirt in his sin juice mug.
Sin juice.
And anyway, so definitely check out our online store. They make for great gifts, and we really appreciate you guys supporting us and supporting our channel. And of course, the best way to support us is subscribe and then buy even more things. Okay, so here we go. First, I just wanted to say that there was a couple common themes throughout conference. I just wanted to address some of those common themes were, and I'm going to start with exactly what Nelson said in his opening talk from conference. Unusual times brings unusual rewards. That was a very common theme throughout conference. Another very common theme was we are being tested, and that's why everything is so hard, because we got to make sure that we're going to follow Jesus even when things are hard. How else? Otherwise, how do we know that we would follow Jesus? It's important. They talked a lot about COVID and how we're still moving forward strong. And they talked about culture and society not being as important as the gospel. They talked about the importance of unity and togetherness. They talked about the importance of being prepared. They talked about difficulties and worldwide difficulties as well as personal difficulties. And they talked about finding joy in your trials and being grateful even when you have trials. And maybe even be grateful for those trials. And
They talked about Mormon stuff, basically.
And Satan is working harder than ever, so we need to be fully in more than ever, than more. So that was basically conference. So also I did some videos recapping every single talk, and I'll put the links to those in the description below if you want to go and watch. So all of that. So that's kind of don't you feel like that's a good overview of the reoccurring messages, the ones you were sober for?
Yeah. It was mostly just boring. I think a lot of ex-Mormons watch it, and sometimes they gotta really reach to be annoyed with some of the things they're saying, because I tried. I remember my first General Conference out of the church, I was excited I was going to make a drinking game out of it every time they said something that pissed me off. And then me and my friends got all ready, and then we turned it off in like 15 minutes. We're like, this sucks.
Well, it can often feel pretty boring when you don't believe that this is inspired the way that you used to. So it's like you sit there and it's just like, okay, this is just a guy, and maybe it's a guy I don't even respect. And so, like, some of the messages can feel like, okay, this is, not something I'm interested in. Okay, so the first talk I wanted to mention, other than Nelson saying unusual times can bring unusual rewards, was Bednar's talk. And he basically just said, like, the gap is widening between the church and the world, and you can't have one foot in the church and one foot in the world anymore, because your legs they can't stretch that far. And it was really funny, because when he said that, do you remember what you said? Something to the effect of, when was the time that you could do that?
Oh, yeah. No, he was like, gone are the days when you could, go to orgies on Saturday and still have a temple recommend on Sunday. I was like, when could you do that? Like, when were the days when I could have been a raging alcoholic and hit my wife and then been like totally straight in Mormon? Like, hey, we're real cracking down on these commandments. Bednar it's odd because he's usually just so relatable and...
Oh my gosh, stop! Oh man. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to mention was Quentin L Cook, I think, had a pretty controversial talk. Basically because he talked about the importance of unity and togetherness and loving and respecting people that are different, but then he also said that it's really important to leave behind anything involved in your own personal culture or background or ancestry that doesn't fit in alignment with the LDS Church. And I think that's probably going to offend a lot of people. And
the thing about that one is, I think that your moral code should absolutely supersede any cultural immoralities. For example, like if I live in a state where every year around Christmas time we get together and we like throw a baby off a roof or something like that.
Oh gosh, why does that have to be so awful?
I gotta go extreme here. I think I should be like, you know what? That's against my moral code, and you should stop doing that. And what it seems like a pretty piss poor defense to be. It's my culture, man. You can't tell me not to throw babies. We've been throwing babies off roofs for like 250 years now. We're not going to stop just because you can't get off your high horse.
Why was that your example?
Because it's just obviously bad, I guess.
Inarguably bad. You know what else is inarguably bad? Like kicking puppies. That's also really bad example. Okay, never mind. I get it.
Anyway, what I'm saying is that your moral code should supersede your culture, but I don't exactly trust Mormonism to be that moral code. You know, well, it's not that I don't trust it. It's it adds some shit in there that's just kind of irritating because I can't see anything immoral with getting a tattoo. And there are a lot of like Pacific Islander tribes who have tribal tattoos. It's really big in their culture. And since I can't justify a way like morally to tell them not to do that, I don't, it feels kind of shitty to be like, well, because God doesn't want you to do that, so you can't do that thing that's very important to your heritage and at worst a morally neutral act.
I hear you. I think the thing that was ironic about this talk to me was, okay, so you hear a lot of members say, like, the gospel is perfect, but the people aren't. And you also hear a lot of people complaining about Mormon culture, like active LDS members complaining about Mormon culture and about Utah culture and saying how bad it is, but then saying, but the gospel's perfect. But in this talk, he kept saying that, the most important thing that we do is we follow the gospel and the culture of the gospel. Like, he actually used the language, like, the culture and doctrine of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which was weird to me because it's almost like we follow our culture, but that's, like, the thing most Mormons don't like about the church. And so what does gospel culture even mean if it isn't this nuance of like people doing things that isn't really supposed to be a rule? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was just odd to me that he would go on and on about how it's so important to follow the gospel and culture of the gospel. And I was just like, when I think of Mormon culture, I think of people getting married too young and not drinking caffeine. Like, that's the culture. Like, but that's not really what you follow as a member. You love the doctrine, not the culture. I don't know.
I think he's saying the culture that exists in Godland. When we all go...
I think he's using LDS culture like in a different definition than everyone else uses it, which is why I was confused.
I think he's using it as like the ideal culture that Mormonism would inspire.
Sure.
Is what it's saying.
Yeah.
And probably saying that they're not super clear, I guess, sometimes.
Yeah. This was hit on a lot, though. I was surprised that they kept hashing this, like, leave behind culture for the gospel. And I'm sure it's going to be very offensive to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And like you said, I get where they're coming from. And it makes sense. Like, if this is the one true church, it needs to be the most important thing in your life. I understand that. I've never heard them use the word culture so much in a general conference before. So I wonder, like, why this was so big right now. But I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Ronald Rasband's talk. Remember, he had one of your favorite lines.
Oh,
happens
God.
in every single conference.
I think you should be excommunicated if you refer to your wife as Sister Rasband. You know? I should just right away, no questions asked. You're out of the church. You can never come back. No repentance.
He said something like...
Jesus' atonement does not apply to you. What a stupid... It's not even a sexist thing, because women should be excommunicated for it, too. It's the most impersonal and nerdy thing to say. He should be bullied for that.
Jared, what is wrong with you? I swear he's sober right now.
When he said Sister Rasband, I was like, you virgin!
Jared did say that. It's just funny because a lot of times they'll do that. They'll say sister so-and-so and I went and did this thing. Like refer to their wife as sister so-and-so. And it does seem impersonal, but I think they do it out of respect. I think they're trying to be respectful.
I think they think it's respectful. It sounds stupid. It's your best friend, you know? And the women do it too. Just as like, I was talking with President Nelson, you know, the prophet, my husband. Anyway.
That definitely sounds like Wendy goes around saying that. Oh, man. Anyway. Okay, so another thing from Ronald Rasband's talk I wanted to mention was he talked about temple recommends a lot. And a lot of people are surmising, like, oh, the reason they're pushing the temple is because everyone has to pay tithing if they have a temple recommend. And I'm like, that's maybe. Either that or they believe the church is true, you know, one or the other. He said, I used to view, like, my temple recommend as a ticket to the Lord's house, but now it's like a badge of honor for my righteousness before the Lord. And I just thought that was, I don't know, I thought that was just kind of a funny way of looking at it. Like, I remember how important that was to me as a Mormon too, like to have this badge of honor to show that I'm righteous. Like it's about validating from the outside instead of validating from within.
Well, it's definitely I don't know, you could take it the right way and validate it from within or whatever, but that's a talk that I probably would have thought was really awesome when I was Mormon, you know, because to me that's like, don't be doing the temple. You don't get like a vacation just because the world is in pandemic. You know, you gotta stick to your values.
Right, because he basically said even though temples are closed in a lot of places, you should still have an active temple recommend. And he's like, even if you're not anywhere near a temple, you should have an active recommend. The next talk I wanted to touch on was Oaks. And his was another one that I think is going to be pretty controversial in some ways. But basically, he talked a lot about politics, which I was really surprised by. And there was actually a lot of talks that kind of did this, like touching on racism and things like that. And I guess I was just surprised because in the past, I thought they never really hit on politics ever unless it had to do with gay, you know? Like, otherwise, they just tried to stay, like, really neutral with politics. But, anyway, in his talk, he basically talked a lot about how it's important that we obey the law, even though some of us want to change the laws. We should, if we're going to protest, we should protest peacefully, etc.
Yeah, I'm all for... you know, tell people not to be violent and things like that. But I always get annoyed when they harp on the...
that article of faith.
Yeah, the article of faith.
There's an article of faith that says something along the lines of, we are subject to kings and magistrates and laws. And
basically they always say, obey the law of the land.
Yeah.
And I was always taught growing up that was kind of like, yeah, no matter what, you have to obey the law. You know, like even they talk about how Joseph Smith, he met an escaped slave or something, and then the slave, like he paid the slave's fine or something like that for his freedom, and that was supposed to be this big thing. Like he obeyed the law, even though it was an unjust law. And I was like, that's lame, man. That law is just deeply evil, and there's so many examples of the Bible, like in the Bible, of people not obeying the law because they were commanded to not obey the law.
Well, and like, yeah, it's like Daniel in the Lion's Den. That the reason why that story was so cool is because they were like, don't pray, it's illegal. And he was like, F you guys, I love Jesus. And he prayed anyway.
Yeah, and even, like, I'm not a Bible guy, but, like, I like that story because that's a person standing on, like, my
Their
moral
morals,
code is
yeah.
more important to me than life. And
more important than laws.
Cool as hell.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he's standing against everyone, and I don't know. This isn't a call to go rioting or anything like that. So
Oh, no.
I don't like people torching properties. I don't do that. I hate it when they harp on that so much.
I just thought this was kind of funny. D. Todd Christofferson mentioned in his talk that people are, like, we see in the world that people are generally good. And he's like, and I just want to remind you all that's because they have the light of Christ. Because in Mormon doctrine, what gives you your conscience is the light of Christ. Now, you don't get the Holy Ghost until you're 8 years old and you get baptized, but everyone has the light of Christ. And I just thought it was funny because it almost was like him it's like taking credibility, like, for the world, because he was like, it doesn't matter whether they're aware of it or not, if they've never heard of Jesus or not. The reason why they have a conscience is because they have the light of Christ. Which leads me to question, what if someone doesn't have a conscience? Does that mean that they don't have the light of Christ? And if so, why?
I might argue that people are not good generally.
What?
Oh boy. I think a lot of times we mistake being harmless for being virtuous. I think most of the people around me, I could say are good. But are they good or are they harmless? Because I think if you're harmless, that means you lack the ability to do evil, which kind of means that you lack the ability to really do good. And so I think that in the society we live in right now, it's set up to where at least appearing virtuous or appearing harmless is of great personal gain to most people. You don't lose anything, for the most part, for being honest.
I think the church has this notion that they share a lot that's like, okay, if you leave the church, there's a good chance that you're going to do really bad things. And I feel like this, you know, when you see someone turn ex-Mormon or whatever, if they're drinking or whatever, they're like, look, see, it's because they're ex-Mormon. Not because they don't think there's anything wrong with alcohol, but because they are ex-Mormon and they don't have the spirit anymore. But then for those people who aren't inside of Mormonism, but they're still good, they're like, well, that's because the light of Christ. And it's like, it just makes their doctrine true no matter what you do, basically. You know what I mean?
What's the opposite of damned if you do, damned if you don't?
Heaven if you do. Oh, man, that's funny. Okay, so the next talk I wanted to highlight was Stephen J. Lund, because he talked about his kid with cancer, and immediately me and Jared were just, like, groaning, because we were like, I don't want to hear this talk. But it was just, I don't know, it was heartbreaking to me, because he talked about his kid being a deacon and being really sick from chemo and, like, still, like, getting dressed even though he could barely walk, and so that he could go and serve the sacrament to everyone. And I'm like, you know, maybe that kid needed something, like, to feel purpose, and maybe that was good for him. But I also think this lesson of, like, church comes before your own health and well-being is so dangerous. I heard a story from our good friend Jonas over at, he's an ex-JW, and he, his channel, what's it called?
Goat-like personality?
Yeah, yes. And he talked about how sick his wife got and how the leaders of their church were like, oh, you need to preach more and that will make you better. And it was just terrible because it was making her more sick. Like she had a disease, incurable, and it was making it worse. Anyway, so it really breaks my heart to see those kind of situations happen, because I think sometimes what you really do need is rest, and that is what's best for you. And wouldn't God understand that?
See, my defense of this talk is that, so in Jonas's story, they said, get better, or preach more, and you'll get better. And I think that's a terrible, terrible thing to say to somebody.
It is.
But in this story, in Stephen Lund's story, the kid's mom actually told him, like, hey, look, dude, you're hurting too much. Well, you don't need to go to church. Mm-hmm. Like, God, understand. Because she had that conversation with him. And I don't know. I felt like it was something that gave, like you said, gave him purpose. I really don't have any criticism of that exact story. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like I feel like I could have been that kid, is what I'm saying. Like, I would have felt maybe even more inspired to go do something that would have seemed mundane to me before, but now it's really difficult for me to do.
Yeah, I get that. And maybe that's what he needed. I still just don't like this.
It's like an opportunity to demonstrate courage in his head, I think. And not a lot of people in these days have an opportunity to demonstrate courage. So, I don't know, maybe it felt like he was jumping on that opportunity.
Yeah, I guess I just don't like perpetuating this notion that, like, you need to always put yourself on the back burner in order to serve everyone else, in order to fulfill your callings and stuff like that. This is what continues to perpetuate this notion that you can't say no to a calling, even when you're too busy. You can't. So, to me, I didn't super like it, but anyway, that's just my feelings about it. Anyway. The next talk I wanted to mention was Garrett W Gong, and I just thought it was funny because his talk was basically like, unless the church were true, how would it have grown? And and it was just like, do you know how many big churches there are out there that you think aren't true? And I just thought it was kind of funny.
If you have an argument in favor of a certain position, if that argument could be applied to several different positions that conflict with your position, maybe don't use that argument. Maybe that argument is invalid. Like, the easiest example is, well, it's true because it feels good. Like, I feel God speaking to me. Well, that argument can be applied to Judaism, Islam, all forms of Christianity. Every religion can say, well, God told me it's true, so come up with a better argument.
Okay, Rebecca M. Craven spoke during the Relief Society General podcast, and her talk just confused me because she talked about, like, you know, when you pay a cashier and you give him money, but you give him too much, he gives you back change. Well, Jesus atoned for us, and he gave us, more than we could ever pay back. So what can we give him? Change. Our change. We can change ourselves. And it was funny because I thought it was going to be a metaphor, but then it just turned out to be wordplay. It was very confusing.
See, I was about 20 ounces into Maker's Mark at this point, so I thought that was why I was confused. But Morgan seemed just as confused as I was, so...
Again, it's like I don't think it was a bad message or anything. I was just confused. Okay, the other thing that was kind of funny about the Relief Society broadcast, and again, I mean, these are people, spreading what they believe, and they're, doing a good job of it. They had this video presentation, and they prefaced it with, like, you guys have been having this amazing influence on the world. Now you're going to watch this presentation. And literally, the presentation was a 3-minute long video. No talking. Just music. And it was a bunch of stock footage of people doing things like hanging out with a friend or cooking or reading their scriptures.
Yeah, it didn't even have like a central message or anything. It's not like service.
Wait. Then zoom into picture of Jesus. Boom. That was that was the video. And I was like waiting for them to explain what it meant, and they never did. I'm not even trying to diss Mormonism. I just don't understand what the purpose of that video was.
It was odd. Especially, they don't need, like, filler in general conference. There's no shortage of people who are, like, jumping at the chance to speak in general conference.
And they have a lot of good videos.
Yeah, you usually have plenty of videos they could... I don't get that. I think they were like, these footages of females, so maybe it will appeal to the females.
That's kind of how it made it look. And the females will love this.
I bet Bednar was behind this. It's odd because he's so relatable.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so the last talk during the Relief Study broadcast was Nelson, and he said one line that really upsetted me, and I just wanted to share it, because, I mean, it's personal, but this is just how I felt. He said, life without God is a life filled with fear. Life with God is a life full of peace. And that bothered me for so many reasons, but especially because, again, it's this, I don't know, I don't like this arrogant vibe of, like, you can't be happy outside of the church. That's exactly the message that this is sending, which is already a message that everyone believes, is there's no real happiness outside of this church. Which I guess if you believe it's God's one true church, then you would have to believe that. But I hate it because it's what causes members to treat ex-members so condescendingly and to tell them things like, oh, you think you're happy, but you're not really happy. So I was kind of triggered by him saying that personally.
It's also one of those irrefutable things, like if I were to tell
Prove
you...
it.
Yeah.
Let's take a poll. Let's have ex-Mormons rate their fear before they left the church and then rate it after.
No, see, it's not even that. It's completely irrefutable because...
They think they're happy, but wickedness never was happy.
No, I'm going with this quote right here, exactly.
Okay.
Because they'll say life without God is filled with fear or whatever. So it's kind of like if you say something like, well, I'm not filled with fear, it's just kind of, they can come back with, well, that's because God exists. Idiot. God exists. Why would you be fearful? That's like me saying, as long as, if I tell you that there's a spaceship, it's invisible, and it's always 2 feet away from your head. No matter what you do, you'll never be able to touch it. It's always right here, this little spaceship. And if it weren't there, you would just be miserable. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, I don't have one, and you do have one, though. The spaceship's there, man. It's floating there. I know, because I am allowed to see them. So...
Alright, so the next thing I wanted to bring up was the talk from this Sunday morning. Russell Ballard said that as he was traveling before COVID and everything, he said, I felt the Spirit tell me that I need to tell these people, he was speaking to a congregation, I need to tell them to pray for our country's leaders. And he's like, and it wasn't in my prepared remarks, but I felt the Spirit telling me to do that. And that was way before... it was, COVID was happening and stuff. So I was inspired by the Spirit, which, okay, I find this funny for a couple reasons. Because one, he was really attaboying himself. And two, usually when a story like this is brought up, it's an apostle talking about a different apostle because it's less weird. Anyway.
I have this suspicion that, in Sandlot, the little brother that kept repeating what the older brother would say? It was Tommy, and he'd always turn around and be like, shut up, Tommy! That's how I view Ballard. And he's like the runt of the litter of the apostles.
Oh,
no. he's like the Ralph Wiggum, like, my mom says I'm cool! And stuff like that. So he's trying to impress the other apostles, comes up like, guys, I told them to pray. I don't know. It came to me, man. I didn't even prepare that.
Oh,
I didn't write it down. You look at my script. It's not there.
Oh my god.
I told them to pray. It just came to me.
Oh, man.
Whoa!
I think the thing I find funny about it, too, is that I feel like Mormons are going to use that as evidence to their ex-Mormon family members. Like, look, see, he told them, and he didn't even know about coronavirus. And it's like, he also told you that in a talk with no proof that actually happened. I'm not saying he's lying, but again, it's like, it's not super compelling when you're someone who's not in the church, but someone who's in the church thinks it's so compelling because they can't lie. Anyway. The other problem with that is even if he was inspired and he knew that COVID was going to happen and really was inspired to say this, that still doesn't actually mean that the church is true. So that's the other problem. Could just mean he's very spiritual. Okay, so the next talk I wanted to highlight was Ulises Suarez. And the funny thing about this talk was that it was all about sex and porn without ever using either of those words. So that was impressive. And honestly, this talk was hard for me because I had a friend growing up who had sex with his girlfriend before he was supposed to. And no, it wasn't me. Okay, so...
you should have waited till you married her in a temple to have sex with her.
No, I was thinking that they were going to think I was the girlfriend. Oh my gosh. It's fine. Okay, so basically he had sex with his girlfriend and was so devastated afterward because he felt so guilty. And then he went through the repentance process and then he was like feeling so much better. And that's exactly a story that Suarez shares. Not that story, but the same kind of story he shares. And it's like, look how happy he was after he repented. The thing that bothers me about that is that most of the time when someone feels really bad about themselves from something sexual, it's because they were taught to feel really bad about themselves. So then, of course, they're going to feel better when some authority figure tells them that they're allowed to feel better. So this just bothered me because I feel like it's unnecessary shaming, and I just hated the way that happened to my friend when I was growing up, and I hated the way that it continues to happen to people, personally.
Well, it was bad because he was talking about it, and he's like, I saw my friend after he go through serious transgression, and he was very sad looking, and it was because he had sinned. Well, no shit. He told him that this sin is second to murder, man. He thinks he just basically killed someone. Of course he feels like shit. It's not because the spirit left him. It's because you told him, you're gonna feel like shit. Since he's been born, you know?
Told him that you should feel that way. You should feel that way. It's just, I don't know. I just don't like it. Did I cut you off? Did you want to say anything else about that? The next thing I wanted to mention was a Neil L. Anderson's talk. He did say something that I liked. Like he said, when you're having conversations with people, don't feel pressured to like try to make it always lead to a missionary discussion or a baptism. He said, let the Lord guide people when they are ready. And I actually really like that because I feel like a lot of the times it's like they put a lot of pressure on like, you need to bring back those in your family and those in your friends that have left or that aren't going to church or whatever. And I liked that he had said, let the Lord guide them when they're ready. Like, don't put so much pressure on yourself. Just talk about what's important to you and try to bring the church up if you can. And I don't know. I just thought it was lighter than it normally is, and I liked that.
I don't think I watched it.
Yeah. Okay. So Nelson talked. This was his last talk. Not his last talk. This was the last talk of the Sunday morning session, and he said, just something kind of funny. He talked about letting God prevail in your life, and that was like the big message from his talk. And Israel is being gathered right now, and he said, instead of praying to find those that are ready to find the gospel like we normally pray, we should be praying to find those that are willing to let God prevail in their life. And he's like, imagine the difference it will make. And I was like, I don't understand how those are different. Especially if you think your church is true, then those shouldn't be any different.
Yeah. He's a smart dude, I think. I mean, you have to be a heart surgeon, but he just, I don't know. Maybe I'm being mean or something, but he doesn't strike me as like a thinker. Because he thought that was so profound.
Yes, thank you. I feel validated right now. He also in that talk mentioned like that God doesn't love one race more than another, and this was brought up a couple times by different leaders. But he said your devotion to God and the commandments matters more than the color of your skin. Like it's irrelevant, really.
It's actually what causes the color in your skin.
Oh my gosh. Okay, for those who don't know, that's a throwback to like old Mormon doctrine used to say that black people were a result of, how do I explain it quickly?
Pre-mortal fence sitters. They didn't fight in God's army, but they didn't join Satan's army either.
Right, and then there was the Lamanites that were cursed because of their evilness.
And if they were good
enough,
they'd become white. So.
Yeah, anyway, there's a lot of past racism in Mormonism that... Anyways, and that's exactly why I think a lot of people are going to be mad at Nelson for saying this, like, because he basically called out to all the members to say, stop being racist. I think a lot of people are going to be mad because they're going to be like, well, the church is so racist and you guys have never apologized for it. So I think a lot of people are going to be upset about that. Personally, I think the church used to be very racist and, is much better now than it was in the 1800s. So,
Or the 1900s.
Or the 1970s.
Yeah.
But, I'm like, okay, kudos that they're getting better. Let's just hope the church keeps getting better. And I think because of all the activism that's going on, it will. Okay, so Holland talked in the last session on Sunday, and he said something that I actually liked. He said, I don't think it's possible to have a life filled with faith and also be stress-free. And I think this is really cool because you hear the same message over and over again of like, okay, if you follow Jesus, you're going to have peace and happiness and joy. But like Holland kind of, I liked his message of like, you know what, but also be realistic because guess what? Life is hard. And just because you have faith, you're not always going to be stress-free. And he said, floating, like he said, you can't ask God to only give you good things just because you're following God. And he even said, you can't just float along on your little cloud of Christianity. He said Christianity is comforting, but not always comfortable. And that it's a hard thing to walk and it takes courage, but the reward is worth it. Anyway, and in general, I just actually liked that message a lot more than some of what else I was hearing. I thought that was good.
Whenever I see Holland, I kind of just think, man, I wish Richard Nixon were around still because it would be so cool to like put money on who would win in like a jowl fight between those two.
That is mean.
Oh, this taffy, you son of a gun! I'm not a crook.
Oh my gosh. Okay, just ignore Jared, guys. He wasn't invited to this. Look, that's why. It's because he was drinking coffee. Oh my gosh. Look what it did. Made him so
drunk.
Rude. Anyway, any other closing thoughts about conference?
It's over.
Oh my god, thank God. Watching it, one thing I'll say is that it felt cool to watch it and not feel like I was as triggered as watching it in the past. And like I can appreciate some good things that they're saying, but also be critical of things that don't make sense to me in like a space that I feel like is really safe of like, I don't feel like I have to, have that mental like gymnastics anymore. Cause even when I was out of the church for a while, it was still like, whoa, wait a second. Maybe he has a point. Like, it was just hard. Conference is really hard as an ex-Mormon for a lot of people. So, we're sending you guys all of our love and hugs. I know this can be really triggering time for a lot of people, but remember that no matter what you believe, that you are deserving of acceptance and being treated respectfully and lovingly. And that is our General Conference message to you all. Amen. Oh, we're allowed to clap in my church.
Oh, well, I mean, that's...
You're not gonna...
That's irreverent, but whatever.
You're not gonna clap for me. Oh my gosh, you don't even deserve this mug.
I'm gonna go refill this mug.
Oh man. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to check out our online store. It's in the link in the description below. We really appreciate your support. Thanks to our Patreons so that we can continue this channel, and thanks to all of you who buy awesome, cool merchandise and shirts that also allow this channel to continue. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. Do I need a disclaimer?
For what?
I was gonna say, like, we're not trying to be dicks or whatever. I guess.
I mean, you're not trying to be a dick.
Alright, speak for yourself.
I just had a hypothetical jowl fight between Holland and Nixon. I feel like I can't make that joke and then be like, I'm not trying to be an ass.
Well, some of us are, just better than others.